Usually when we talk about diagnosing a problem, there's like this expectation of precision.
Right, like an engineering problem.
Exactly. Like you break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points and says, there it is.
Broken or not broken. Very clean.
Right. It's binary. We like things to be visible, to be categorized neatly into little boxes.
It's comforting to think the world operates on simple cause and effect. A broken pipe means a leak. A flat tire means the car stops.
But then you step into the world of governance, or economics, of trying to understand how a country of over 1 billion people actually functions. Suddenly that x-ray machine is just, well, it's totally useless.
Yeah, the diagnostic landscape is incredibly murky.
Because a rising temperature in the Pacific Ocean doesn't just mean a hot summer, right? It means a farmer in Maharashtra changes what they plant.
Exactly, which then changes the national inflation rate.
Which in turn changes how the Reserve Bank of India manages our currency, and that affects the interest rates on a middle-class family's home loan.
Because in the real world, and especially in the world you are preparing to manage as a future administrator, nothing happens in a vacuum.
Right.
The syllabus you study, geography, economy, polity, science, I mean, these aren't actually separate subjects.
No.
They're just different lenses for looking at the exact same incredibly complex machine.
And that is exactly what we are doing today. Welcome to the Daily Deep Dive, the 3D initiative of UPSC with Saurabh Kaushik.
It is Saturday, 30 May 2026.
For those of you listening, you dedicated civil services aspirants out there, you already know that rote memorization is completely obsolete.
Memorizing a list of facts won't help you when you're sitting in a district magistrate's chair.
It certainly won't help you clear the mains. Our mission today is to take 10 critical current affairs topics drawn from our sources, the Hindu and the Indian Express explained, and really connect those dots.
We're going to show you how a global climate phenomenon ripples all the way down to a citizen's digital wallet.
So to understand this machine, I guess we have to start with its engine. And for the Indian economy, that engine is the sky.
We are looking at the foundational element of our food security and rural demand. The India Meteorological Department, the IMD, just revised their monsoon forecast. And, well, the implications are severe.
Yeah, on May 29th, the IMD Director General released the updated second stage long-range forecast for the 2026 Southwest monsoon.
And the numbers aren't looking good.
No, they're not. Back in April, the prediction was sitting at 92% of the long period average, or LPA. Now they've curtailed it further, dropping it down to 90%.
And just for everyone tracking this, the LPA is the average rainfall over India during the June to September monsoon. It's calculated over a 50-year baseline.
Which sits at about 87 centimeters, right?
Correct. And the IMD classifies anything below 96% as below normal. So 90% is firmly in the danger zone.
But the 90% figure is troubling on its own.
Right?
So we have to factor in the model area, too.
Yes. The IMD's forecasting models have an error margin of plus or minus 4%.
Okay.
That means the actual rainfall could range anywhere from 94%, which is still a below normal year, all the way down to 86%.
Wow, 86%. That flirts with outright drought conditions in specific regions.
Exactly. And the region we are most concerned about is the monsoon core zone.
Right, the agricultural heartland. So we were talking about Vidarbha, Marathwada, Central Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Odisha, Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, and Karnataka.
Correct. These are India's primary rain-fed agriculture areas. They just lack the extensive canal and groundwater irrigation networks you see in Punjab or Haryana.
So if the sky doesn't deliver water, the crops just fail.
They fail. And on top of this overall predicted shortage, the actual arrival of the monsoon is delayed.
Right. The IMG originally predicted it would hit the Kerala coast early, around May 26. Then they pushed it to May 31st.
And now we are looking at June 3, which is 2 days past the historical normal onset date.
So I wanted to dig into the mechanics of that delay for a second. The monsoon engine was supposedly running fine in mid-May. We had the intense heat over the North Indian plains, creating that massive low-pressure zone.
The pole, yes.
Right. And down in the southern Indian Ocean, near Madagascar, the mascarene high was providing the high-pressure push, sending those moisture-laden winds toward the subcontinent. So what broke the mechanism?
A severe cyclone in the Bay of Bengal in late May. It completely disrupted the atmospheric circulation.
Oh, wow.
For the IMD to officially declare the onset of the monsoon over Kerala, a very specific set of criteria must be met.
Like what?
Things like a continuous defined rainfall belt over the Andaman Sea and the Bay of Bengal, along with specific wind speeds and outgoing long-wave radiation levels.
Got it.
The cyclone essentially vacuumed up all that moisture and scattered it, disorganizing the entire monsoon advance.
Wow.
The system now has to rebuild that momentum totally from scratch.
But wait, a delayed onset doesn't automatically mean a disastrous season, does it?
Oh,
I mean, I remember looking at the data from 2021. The onset was delayed by a couple of days, but we ended up with a pretty normal season overall.
That's true. The rain caught up in July and August. A delay alone is not a death sentence for the season. You are right to point that out.
Okay, good.
However, 2021 did not have the overarching macro-climatic headwinds we are facing in 2026.
Oh.
We are dealing with a convergence of negative indicators, and the absolute most dominant factor is El Nino.
The warming of the central and eastern equatorial Pacific Ocean.
Yes.
So how exactly does warmer water thousands of miles away stop rain in central India? Yeah. We hear the term El Nino thrown around constantly, but the physical mechanism often gets kind of glossed over.
It comes down to a massive atmospheric conveyor belt called the Walker Circulation.
Okay.
Under normal conditions, trade winds blow from east to west across the Pacific, pushing warm surface water toward Indonesia and Australia.
Right.
This creates a huge pool of warm water in the western Pacific, which evaporates, rises, and creates heavy rainfall. The air then travels east, high in the atmosphere, and sinks over the cooler eastern Pacific off the coast of South America, creating dry conditions there. That is a normal Walker circulation.
And El Nino essentially throws a wrench into that conveyor belt.
It reverses or severely weakens it. The trade winds falter. That pool of warm water sloshes back eastward towards South America. Because the warm water shifts, the rising air and rainfall shift with it, moving away from the western Pacific and the Indian Ocean. This suppresses the upward motion of air over our region.
That makes a lot of sense.
Historically, if you look at the last 20 El Nino years, 13 resulted in below normal monsoons in India, and 3 produced severe droughts.
Wow.
Current dynamic models show this 2026 El Nino establishing firmly right in the crucial June-July window and peaking in September-October.
But usually we look to the Indian Ocean Dipole, the IOD, as our localized backup plan, right?
Yes, a positive IOD.
For the western Indian Ocean near the Arabian Sea is warmer than the eastern part near Indonesia, and that can sometimes overpower the negative effects of El Nino and pull moisture toward India anyway.
It can act as a buffer, yes.
But the IND says the IOD is sitting at neutral this year. It's like hoping your friend will cover your shift at work when everything is going wrong, but your friend is out of town.
That captures the vulnerability perfectly. A neutral IOD means there is no strong temperature differential between the western and eastern Indian Ocean to give the monsoon that extra localized boost.
So it provides zero buffering capacity against the suppressive weight of El Nino.
Zero. So we have a delayed onset, a developing El Nino, and an absent IOD.
Let's trace this down to the ground level because the economic implications are immediate. This threatens the entire Kharif sowing season.
Yes, we are talking about rice in Odisha and eastern UP, pulses in MP and Maharashtra, cotton, sugarcane.
And farmers are facing a double whammy this year. They are dealing with this delayed, deficient rainfall at the exact same time they are facing a severe fertilizer supply shock.
Right. The ongoing conflict in West Asia, specifically involving Iran, has completely disrupted global supply chains for urea and diammonium phosphate.
Elevated fertilizer prices combined with low soil moisture, agricultural yields will inevitably drop.
Which immediately triggers food inflation.
The RBI is legally mandated to keep inflation at 4%.
Yes, but if the Kharif crop fails, food prices skyrocket, and their job becomes nearly impossible.
And it's not just food, is it? The live storage in India's 150 major reservoirs is currently sitting at an abysmal 17% of full capacity.
It's terrifying. The 10-year average for this time of year is 22%.
So we are running on absolute fumes.
If the monsoon doesn't replenish those reservoirs, we aren't just facing an agricultural crisis, we are facing a drinking water crisis in major urban centers.
And a power crisis, because hydropower makes up roughly 11% of our installed electricity capacity.
Exactly. The temperature of the Pacific Ocean quite literally dictates the price of pulses in a Delhi market, and whether the lights stay on in Bangalore. This is the interconnectedness we're talking about.
But while the monsoon threatens our future nutritional output, we just received a massive comprehensive report card on our current demographic health.
Yes, the government released the long-awaited data from NFHS6, the National Family Health Survey.
And the 2023-24 data, released on May 29, is an absolute goldmine for anyone analyzing General Studies Paper 1 and 2.
This survey is massive in scale. It covered almost 6.8 lakh households across 715 districts. It provides the most granular look at the health, nutrition, and social indicators of the Indian population.
Let's start with the headline victories, because some of these numbers represent monumental public health achievements.
Truly monument.
The most striking one is institutional deliveries. We have hit 90.6%.
Incredible.
More than 9 out of 10 births in India are now happening in hospitals or specialized health facilities, up from 88.6% in the last survey.
We are approaching near universal institutional delivery, which is the single most effective way to drive down both the maternal mortality ratio and the infant mortality rate.
And we are seeing corresponding improvements across the board, aren't we?
We are. Antenatal care coverage mothers receiving adequate medical checkups during pregnancy is up to almost 96%.
Wow.
Stunting in children dropped significantly from 35.5% to 29.3%.
That's a massive drop.
An early initiation of breastfeeding within 1 hour of birth jumped from around 42% to over 50%.
These numbers don't just magically improve on their own. We have poured thousands of crores into schemes like the Janani Suraksha Yojana, JSY, since 2005.
Providing direct cash incentives for women to deliver in hospitals.
We have the Piyush Abhiyan targeting stunting, and Mission Indradhanush pushing full immunization up to 87.1%. But I have a structural question here.
Okay.
Are cash incentives the only reason we finally crossed 90% for hospital births? Because at a certain point, it has to become more than just a financial transaction. Does it indicate a deeper cultural shift in how rural India views modern healthcare?
You are hitting on the sociology of health policy there. It is a virtuous cycle.
How so?
In the early days of JSY, the cash incentive was absolutely the primary mechanism to get the first generation of rural women through the door of the primary health center.
Right.
But once they're there, if they experience safer outcomes, if fewer mothers and babies die, the cultural narrative within the village shifts.
So the financial incentive initiates the behavior, but the improved survival rate cements it as a cultural norm.
Exactly. However, while we celebrate the national averages, they mask deep, persistent inequalities.
The North-South divide in this country is glaring, and NFHS 6 puts it in stark relief.
It is two entirely different demographic realities. Look at a state like Manipur or Kerala. You are seeing infant mortality rates down in the single digits. Manipur is at 3.
Unbelievable.
Then you look at Chhattisgarh, sitting at an IMR of 37. Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, Rajasthan, the Empowered Action Group states, they are lagging far behind on almost every critical metric, from family planning to child nutrition.
And even in the areas where we are succeeding, like getting women into hospitals, new problems are emerging from the very solutions we built.
Unfortunately, yes.
The survey notes that about 30% of these institutional deliveries are happening in private facilities, and the rate of C-sections in those private hospitals is just skyrocketing.
It is becoming a massive public health concern. The World Health Organization recommends a C-section rate of around 10 to 15% for optimal maternal and neonatal outcomes.
So anything higher usually indicates medically unnecessary surgeries.
Right, and in many Indian states, the private sector C-section rate is pushing past 40, even 50%.
What drives that? I mean, is it purely profit-seeking by private hospitals because a surgery costs more than a natural birth? Or is it risk aversion, where doctors are afraid of complications and litigation?
It is a toxic combination of both. There is the undeniable financial incentive for private clinics to schedule surgeries, which are, predictable, faster, and more lucrative.
Right, time is money.
But there's also severe over-medicalization driven by a lack of proper midwifery infrastructure. Doctors are managing low-risk pregnancies that should be handled by trained nurse midwives, leading to a highly interventionist approach to birth.
That makes sense. And furthermore, we still haven't solved the anemia crisis.
This is the great paradox of Indian public health. Despite all the iron and folic acid supplementation programs and the push for food fortification, anemia in women of reproductive age and young children remains stubbornly high.
Which brings us back to the Sustainable Development Goals. SDG 3 focuses on good health, targeting an IMR below 12 by 2030. SDG 2 is zero hunger, aiming to get stunting below 10%.
We are dropping our stunting rates. A 6 percentage point drop in 5 years is globally impressive.
But because of our sheer population size, India still has one of the largest absolute numbers of stunted children on Earth.
The trajectory is positive, but the absolute distance left to travel is immense.
And traveling that distance requires massive state capacity and, frankly, money. We're spending tens of thousands of crores annually on these domestic welfare programs.
Yes.
But funding that social infrastructure requires deep macroeconomic stability. If the government's balance sheet is weak, the welfare spending dries up.
Which transitions us directly into a glaring red flag raised in the latest RBI annual report regarding the flight of foreign capital. We are moving into General Studies Paper 3 territory here.
Okay, let's get into it. The Reserve Bank of India released its annual report 2025-26, and the data on capital flows is causing severe anxiety in the finance ministry.
In the financial year 25-26, India experienced the steepest single-year outflow of foreign portfolio investment, or FPI, in its history.
The number is staggering. Rs 1.78 lakh crore flowed out of our equity markets. To put that in perspective, that is worse than the mass exodus of capital during the COVID crash in 2021.
And it's worse than the infamous taper tantrum of 2013 when the U.S. Fed first started signaling rate hikes.
And it's not just hot money in the stock market. Foreign direct investment, FDI repatriation, hit a record $53.58 billion.
That means foreign companies operating physical businesses here are pulling their profits and capital out at record rates.
Why are all these dollars fleeing at once?
To understand the exodus, we have to look at the mechanics of global finance, specifically the yield spread.
Okay.
The U.S. Federal Reserve has kept its interest rates elevated, sitting around 4.25 to 4.5%. U.S. Treasury yields are highly attractive. Historically, the yield spread. The difference in interest rates between India and the U.S. was wide, usually around 350 basis points. That wide spread made it highly profitable for global investors to borrow cheap money in the West and take risks in emerging markets like India to capture the higher return.
So let me make sure I've got this. It's basically like borrowing your neighbor's cheap lawnmower to landscape a paying client's yard for a profit.
That's a good analogy.
You pay the neighbor a small rental fee, and you keep the massive profit from the landscaping job.
Right.
But now, the U.S. Fed has drastically raised the neighbor's rental fee for that lawnmower. The profit margin on the landscaping job shrinks, so the hustle just isn't worth the effort or the risk anymore.
Exactly. And the risk part of that equation is crucial. If a global fund manager can get a guaranteed risk-free 4.5% return simply by parking their billions in U.S. government bonds, they have absolutely no incentive to take on currency risk, market volatility, and political risk in an emerging market for only a marginally better return.
Right.
Today, that yield spread has narrowed to just 250 basis points. The carry trade has been crushed.
So the math is against us, but it's not just the math, is it? The geopolitical panic is accelerating this.
The ongoing West Asia war, which began escalating severely in early 2026, has thoroughly spooked global markets.
Yeah.
Whenever global stability is threatened, international capital goes into a risk-off mode. Investors instinctively sell off emerging market assets first, viewing them as inherently riskier, and run to the safe haven of the U.S. dollar.
We also have the Trump factor, adding massive uncertainty. His threats of imposing 25% base tariffs plus 50% penalty tariffs on Indian goods are causing investors to doubt our export earnings and corporate profit projections.
And paradoxically, after the recent diplomatic summit between Trump and Xi Jinping, we are seeing some global funds rotate capital out of India and back into China.
Oh, wow. Re-rating Chinese markets after avoiding them for years during Beijing's regulatory crackdowns.
Exactly. This confluence of events creates a terrifying negative feedback loop for the Indian economy.
Because foreign investors sell their Indian stocks. They take those rupees and immediately buy dollars to take their money home.
Right. And that massive selling of rupees weakens our currency against the dollar.
A weaker rupee means the actual dollar returns on any remaining Indian investments drop even further.
Which triggers the next wave of investors to sell, perpetuating the cycle.
The RBI obviously isn't just watching this happen, though. How are they fighting back against this massive outflow?
They deploy traditional macroeconomic defense mechanisms. To attract dollars back into the country, they've raised the deposit rates for FCNRB accounts. These are foreign currency non-resident deposits held by NRIs.
Right.
But their primary weapon is aggressive intervention in the foreign exchange market. The RBI has been actively defending the rupee by selling off our forex reserves, supplying dollars to the market to meet the massive demand from fleeing FPIs.
Well, our reserves peaked at $704 billion back in September 2024. The report notes they've been burned down to the $580 to $595 billion range.
That's a huge drop.
Losing over $100 billion in reserves sounds catastrophic on paper, but the report also contextualizes it, noting we still have enough reserves for about 10 months of import cover. The generally accepted safe baseline is 6 months. So we aren't in a balance of payments crisis like 1991, but that buffer is shrinking fast.
It highlights the inherent risk of deep integration with volatile global markets. When the global economic weather turns bad, our domestic anchors are severely tested.
Absolutely. So we just talked about macroeconomic capital slinging the country because of global yields. But there is a microeconomic drain happening right at street level that destroys local productivity just as fast. Extreme heat.
Yes.
The global geopolitical heat is making capital flee India, but the literal, physical heat is making Indian cities unlivable for the citizens left behind. Banda in Uttar Pradesh just hit 48 degrees Celsius. Delhi is experiencing extreme lethal heat waves.
It's unbearable.
The Hindu ran a powerful editorial on May 30 arguing that we have to fundamentally change how we build our cities immediately.
We are seeing the devastating compounding effects of the urban heat island, or UHI. An intensely dense, concrete-heavy city can be 5 to 9 degrees Celsius hotter than the surrounding rural areas.
Because concrete and asphalt just soak up the sun's radiation like a sponge.
Yes, they absorb solar radiation throughout the day and then re-emit it as heat throughout the night, preventing the city from ever cooling down.
Right.
Plus, rapid urbanization has eliminated transpirational cooling. We've cut down the trees, stopping plants from releasing moisture into the air. High-rise buildings block natural wind corridors, and millions of vehicles and AC units are constantly pumping mechanical waste heat directly into the streets.
The editorial focuses heavily on the physics of heat, specifically a concept called albedo.
Albedo is the measure of how much solar radiation a surface reflects back into the atmosphere rather than absorbing it.
Okay.
A perfect white surface has an albedo close to 1. It reflects almost everything. Dark asphalt or traditional dark roofing materials have an albedo of about 0.005. They absorb 95% of the heat.
So the Hindu is arguing that thermal management can no longer be an optional luxury. It must be a mandatory legal requirement to use highly reflective building materials and maintain minimum green cover.
They point to successful international models. Singapore, for instance, mandates a green plot ratio for all new buildings.
Meaning developers have to incorporate specific volumes of green roofs, vertical gardens, based on the size of their development.
Exactly. Los Angeles has required cool roofs, highly reflective roofing materials on all new buildings and major renovations since 2014. Spain mandates 30% permeable surfaces in urban developments to allow water to cool the ground.
We need these exact policies embedded in our model building bylaws. And the editorial explicitly calls out the need to end the compensatory afforestation charade, where developers chop down ancient, shade-providing trees in the heart of Delhi and promise to plant tiny saplings 50 kilometers away in a degraded forest.
It's just not working. The policy levers to enforce this already exist within our governance framework, though. We have the AMRO 2.0 scheme, which funds urban infrastructure upgrades. We have the Energy Conservation Building Code, the ECBC, managed by the Ministry of Power.
But currently, the ECBC is deeply flawed in its scope, isn't it?
Very flawed. It focuses almost entirely on internal energy efficiency, how well a building keeps its inside cold to save electricity. It completely ignores thermal management for the outside environment.
Right, it doesn't penalize a glass building that acts like a magnifying glass, superheating the pavement below it.
Exactly. We need to upgrade our heat action plans, our HAs, moving them from emergency response protocols like distributing water and opening cooling centers during a heat wave to structural architectural prevention.
It's a beautiful idea to mandate green cover and cool roofs. But let's look at the harsh reality of urban economics. In a city like Mumbai or Delhi, real estate is literally worth its weight in gold.
That's the challenge.
If you mandate that a developer has to give up 25% of their buildable plot for a mandatory green canopy, or spend significantly more on specialized reflective materials, won't they just pass that massive opportunity cost directly to the homebuyer? Are we essentially trading deadly heat for a massive housing affordability crisis?
This is the exact trade-off policymakers grapple with, and it requires looking at the long-term economic horizon. Yes, upfront construction and land allocation costs might rise,
Yeah.
but you have to factor in the catastrophic economic collapse that unchecked UHI brings. When a city hits 48 degrees, outdoor labor simply stops. Construction grinds to a halt. Delivery logistics break down. The power grid fails under the sheer weight of millions of AC units running at maximum capacity.
That's true.
Long-term thermal management is no longer a luxury synthetic choice. Without amending the building codes, urban economic productivity will literally collapse under the heat. The macroeconomic cost of a paralyzed city is exponentially higher than the microeconomic cost of mandating green space.
That is a stark way to frame it, but the physics and the economics align perfectly. So, to secure our cities and our domestic productivity, we need structural architectural changes at home. But to secure our supply chains, our technology, and our maritime borders, we need structural strength abroad.
Which brings us to General Studies Paper 2, International Relations and the Strategic Assessment of the Quad.
The Quad Foreign Ministers meeting just wrapped up in New Delhi on May 26, and the diplomatic assessments following it are distinctly mixed.
The Hindu ran an op-ed heavily critiquing the structural limits of the Quad. The central question the author poses is whether this group is actually capable of enforcing its worthy objectives, or if it is functionally paralyzed by its own foundational design.
Well, let's dissect that design. The Quad India, the United States, Australia, and Japan has no formal charter. It is not an institution. It has no permanent secretariat, no headquarters, and no binding mutual defense pact, completely unlike NATO.
It defines itself strictly as a consultative grouping.
Which means it operates purely on consensus. It can only achieve things that all four members unanimously agree upon without stepping on anyone's bilateral sensitivities.
Precisely. And within those constraints, they have achieved notable things. They coordinated the delivery of millions of COVID vaccines across the Indo-Pacific. They launched the Indo-Pacific Maritime Domain Awareness Initiative, IPMDA, which is a brilliant piece of statecraft.
IPMDA. That provides real-time satellite radar data to smaller nations in the region to track illegal fishing and maritime movements, allowing them to monitor Chinese encroachment without needing their own billion-dollar satellite networks.
Yes. They have established STEM fellowships and critical minerals supply chain initiatives. They provide a united democratic front to signal deterrence to Beijing.
But the failures in enforcement are glaring. China is aggressively militarizing the South China Sea right now. They're engaging in massive gray zone activities, harassing Philippine Coast Guard vessels with water cannons, building artificial military islands, swarming fishing grounds with maritime militia.
And the Quad does what in response?
Right. It issues strongly worded joint statements expressing concern. There is no coordinated military or economic pushback.
Furthermore, there is massive strategic ambiguity regarding Taiwan. India absolutely refuses to commit to defending Taiwan in the event of a Chinese invasion.
That makes complete sense for India's national interest, but it severely weakens the Quad's deterrent threat.
And beyond the structural limits, the Quad is currently facing a crisis of political momentum. With Donald Trump's return to a highly transactional approach to diplomacy, the scheduled 2026 Quad Leaders Summit is completely up in the air.
If the heads of state stop meeting, the grouping immediately loses its prestige and bureaucratic urgency.
Furthermore, the economic pillar of the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, has completely stalled under Trump's protectionist tariff policies.
So if the Quad is just a consultative grouping that issues polite statements about a free and open Indo-Pacific, while China builds literal military bases in contested waters, isn't it just an incredibly expensive, high-level geopolitical book club?
That is the most common critique. It suffers from what IR scholars call the asymmetry problem. Japan and Australia are formal treaty allies with the United States. They have mutual defense pacts, where an attack on one is an attack on the other.
But India is not a treaty ally, and firmly, historically, refuses to become one. We will not commit our military to an alliance structure that forces us into a war we didn't choose.
Therefore, the Quad can never function as an Asian NATO.
Which begs the question,
Right.
why is India even there? If we don't want a military alliance, what are we extracting from this grouping?
We extract a strategic hedge. India used the Quad to balance against Chinese hegemony in Asia without crossing the threshold into an outright bilateral war with Beijing. It gives us diplomatic cover and geopolitical weight.
Okay.
But crucially, and this is the often overlooked part, it gives us unparalleled access to advanced U.S. and allied technology, intelligence sharing, and resilient supply chains.
Right.
India is practicing classic multi-alignment. We sit in the Quad with the U.S. to secure maritime domains and tech, but we simultaneously buy energy and defense equipment from Russia, and we negotiate free trade with the EU. The Quad is just one tool in India's broader strategic toolbox. It is not the entirety of our foreign policy.
That transition to technology access is the perfect pivot. Securing tech supply chains is a stated goal of the Quad, but the reality is the actual technology arms race that will define the next century isn't happening in diplomatic summits in New Delhi. It is happening in highly guarded private server farms in the United States.
It is.
Let's move to GS Paper 3 and look at the artificial intelligence landscape.
On May 28th, Anthropic, an AI safety company founded by former OpenAI engineers, announced a staggering $65 billion Series H funding round.
Let that number sink in for you out there listening. $65 billion in a single private funding round. It is the largest private capital raise in human history.
It pushes Anthropic's post-money valuation to $965 billion. They are nearing a $1 trillion valuation as a privately held company. And the financial metrics back up the valuation. They're now generating an estimated $47 billion in annualized revenue.
That's insane.
This is driven almost entirely by massive enterprise adoption of their newest product, Claude Code.
And with those numbers, they have officially leapfrogged OpenAI, the creators of ChatGPT, who are hovering around $40 to $45 billion in annualized revenue.
Yeah.
The growth is explosive, but we need to explain the technology driving this, because we aren't just talking about better chatbots anymore. This is the shift to agentic AI.
That is the critical distinction. Generative AI, like early versions of ChatGPT, is reactive. You prompt it and it generates a response, a poem, an essay, a block of code.
Right.
Claude Code, as an agentic system, is autonomous and goal-oriented. It doesn't just write a block of code. It manages the entire software development lifecycle. You give it a complex goal, and it autonomously executes multi-step tasks. It writes the code, it builds the testing environment, it debugs its own errors, it navigates the file system, and it deploys the final product. It acts as an autonomous, tireless software engineer.
And the enterprise world banks, healthcare giants, legal firms, they love Anthropic, not just because of the tech, but because of how the company is legally and structurally built. OpenAI has had this incredibly messy public transition from a nonprofit research lab to a capped profit entity to a full for-profit structure, complete with massive boardroom coups and lawsuits from Elon Musk.
Anthropic started differently. They are a public benefit corporation, a PBC. They lean heavily into what they call constitutional AI.
What does that mean in practice?
Constitutional AI fundamentally changes how the model is trained. Instead of relying solely on thousands of human contractors to rate the AI's answers to teach it what is good or bad, which is expensive, and introduces human bias. Constitutional AI gives the model an explicit set of rules.
A constitution?
Yes, drawn from sources like the UN Declaration of Human Rights. The AI then evaluates its own outputs against this constitution and corrects itself. It creates a much more predictable, safer model. Governments and massive corporations trust Anthropic's safety-first, legally rigorous approach far more than OpenAI's Silicon Valley move fast and break things philosophy.
The contrast in scale between this U.S. private sector boom and the Indian context is just jarring. India recently approved the India AI mission. The entire national budget allocated for this mission is Rs 10,371 crore. That is roughly $1.2 billion.
It is a microscopic fraction of the $65 billion Anthropic just raised in one single afternoon.
And yet, who is actually building this technology? Estimates show that roughly 30 to 35% of the world's elite AI and machine learning engineers are Indian.
It is the ultimate brain drain problem, updated for the 21st century. So are we permanently destined to just be the training ground and talent exporter for Silicon Valley? We supply a third of the world's engineering talent, they move to California, and American companies hit trillion-dollar valuations, while our domestic mission operates on pocket change.
This is an incredibly urgent policy question for MIIT, the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. Retaining that talent and funneling it into domestic AI infrastructure is a top national security imperative. The reality is, the Indian government cannot compete dollar for dollar with U.S. private equity. We will not build the next $100 billion foundational model from scratch.
Right.
Instead, India has to compete on smart regulation and niche applications. MIIT is currently drafting a comprehensive AI regulatory framework. If India can adopt principles similar to constitutional AI and create the world's best, most legally sound, safety-first regulatory environment for AI deployment, we can attract the enterprise implementation side of the industry. We might not own the engine, but we can build the smartest, most profitable factories that use the engine. It's about finding our strategic niche. We've been talking about billions of dollars flowing into AI, but back here in India, ordinary citizens are dealing with a totally different numbers game one, where the math simply isn't adding up at the household level. Let's pivot to the economy, specifically the vital distinction between inflation and affordability.
The Indian Express ran a brilliant, data-heavy analysis on this distinction, and it is crucial for GS Paper 1 and 3. The core argument is that government policymakers and the RBI often conflate inflation with affordability in their public messaging, but they represent entirely different economic realities for the citizen.
Let's break that down. Inflation just measures the rate of price increase over time. It's a speedometer. It tells you how fast prices are rising compared to last year. Affordability, however, is the relationship between those rising prices and your actual purchasing power, your income.
Exactly. If the headline Consumer Price Index, the CPI, shows inflation at a manageable 4.8%, which it was in March 2026, the government claims macroeconomic victory. But if your income only grew by 2% during that same period, your affordability just plummeted. You are functionally poorer, even though the central bank says inflation is technically low.
And the data proves this loss of affordability is a widespread reality. Look at the Periodic Labor Force Survey, the PLFS. It shows that real wage growth for agricultural workers has been a dismal 0.87% compound annual growth rate since 2018.
But during that same period, their labor productivity grew by 1.49%.
This is a critical metric. Workers are producing more, they're working harder and generating more value, but their wages aren't keeping up even with their own increased output, let alone keeping up with inflation.
And when you look at what people actually buy to survive, the CPI headline number becomes deeply misleading.
The CPI says inflation is 4.8%, but a basic basket of essentials, food, fuel, cooking gas, education, basic healthcare, has been rising consistently at 8 to 10% annually. NABARD recently released research showing the monthly cost of a nutritious meal plate for a family of 5 has surged 22% since 2022.
The official CPI food basket heavily weights cheap staples like subsidized wheat and rice. But a truly nutritious plate, the kind required to combat the stunting we discussed in the NFHS 6 data, requires vegetables, dairy, pulses, and fruits. The prices of those specific nutritional items have exploded.
It sounds like CPI is a thermostat that says the room is a comfortable 72 degrees, but it's only measuring the temperature right at the ceiling where all the heat rises. Meanwhile, everyone living down on the floor is freezing. If the metric doesn't reflect reality, why doesn't the RBI just change the thermostat?
Because the RBI is bound by a rigid, inflexible legislative mandate. The monetary policy framework legally requires them to target headline CPI at 4% with a tolerance band of plus or minus 2%. That is their singular job. They aren't tasked with measuring the median citizen's overall affordability.
Which brings us to another statistical illusion used in economic narratives: per capita income.
Yes, the average income.
This one always frustrates me. India's nominal per capita income is reported roughly Rs 2.14 lakh for FY26.
Right, that is the mean average. You take the total national income and divide it by the population. But in a country with severe wealth inequality, where the top 10% own roughly 60% of the income, the mean is a mathematically useless metric for understanding the average citizen's life.
Because a small handful of billionaires drastically skew the average upward.
Exactly. The median income, the exact middle point where half the country earns more and half earns less, is significantly lower than that 2.14 lakh figure.
And yet we continually celebrate our headline GDP growth, which hit 7.6% nominal.
But 7.6% GDP growth does not mean every Indian is 7.6% richer. That growth is highly concentrated in the formal corporate sector, IT, finance, and massive government infrastructure spending. Meanwhile, 90% of our workforce operates in the informal sector, which is dealing with stagnant wages, rising unemployment, and massive underemployment.
Which makes the government's recent policy moves regarding social safety nets highly questionable. They're shifting the MNRDA scheme, the Rural Employment Guarantee, from a demand-driven model to a supply-driven normative allocation model starting July 1st.
From a policy perspective, that is an alarming choice. MNRDA was designed specifically as a counter-cyclical safety net.
Right.
When the rural economy is suffering, like during a drought, or when essential inflation hits 10% demand for MNRDA, work naturally goes up, and the government is legally supposed to fund it to put a floor under rural incomes. Capping that supply via normative allocations in a year where we are facing a developing El Niño, a delayed monsoon, and 22% food plate inflation removes the safety net at the exact moment rural affordability is at its weakest.
This gap between inflation and affordability isn't just an abstract economic debate. It has terrifying physical consequences. When people's wages are stagnant and the cost of everything else is rising 10% a year, they cut corners.
They have to.
They can't afford basic maintenance, they can't afford to service their appliances, and when you combine neglected physical infrastructure with the 47-degree heat waves we talked about earlier, you get disasters.
Which brings us to GS Paper 3, Science and Disaster Management, and the recent horrifying spate of AC blasts in Delhi. We saw lethal explosions and fires in a school in Rohini and a restaurant in Chandni Chowk.
When people read AC blast, they often don't understand how an appliance that blows cold air can literally explode like a bomb.
It is pure thermodynamics. To understand the failure, you have to understand the machine. An air conditioner does not magically create cold air. It works via a phase change cycle. A compressor pressurizes a chemical refrigerant gas. As it expands, it absorbs heat from inside the room. The system then pumps that hot gas outside to the condenser coils, where a fan blows outside air over the coils to cool the gas back into a liquid, releasing the heat into the street.
Okay.
But this entire heat exchange process relies on the outside air being cooler than the hot gas in the coils. When the ambient outdoor temperature hits 47 or 48 degrees Celsius, the laws of physics start working against the machine. The condenser cannot efficiently dump the heat into air that is already boiling hot.
So the compressor is basically trying to push a boulder up a sheer cliff.
Precisely. The compressor has to work harder and harder to pressurize the gas enough to force the heat transfer. It draws more and more electrical current, causing internal temperatures and pressures to skyrocket. Now, add in the reality of Delhi's infrastructure. The power grid is massively overloaded during a heat wave, causing severe voltage fluctuations.
Right, voltage drop.
When voltage drops, the compressor is forced to pull even more amperage to keep running at the same speed. Increased amperage generates massive internal heat in the electrical wiring.
Because of the affordability crisis, people are skipping their annual Rs 500 AC servicing. The condenser coils sitting on the balcony get caked in Delhi's notorious PM10 dust pollution. That layer of dust acts exactly like a thick wool sweater, trapping the heat inside the coils instead of letting it dissipate.
Finally, you have the chemistry of the refrigerants themselves. Many older, unserviced units in crowded markets still use R22 gas. If the intense, unmanageable pressure causes a microleak in the copper piping, and the overworked, overheated electrical components create a single spark, the highly pressurized combustible gas ignites, causing a catastrophic explosion.
So how do we actually stop this? Because the heat waves are only going to get worse.
Prevention requires both individual responsibility and aggressive systemic enforcement. Individually, annual servicing to power wash the coils is mandatory. Installing quality voltage stabilizers prevents those lethal amperage spikes, and simply keeping the outdoor compressor unit shaded from direct sunlight drops its operating temperature significantly.
And upgrading units.
Yes, upgrading to modern inverter ACs, which smoothly modulate compressor speed rather than violently switching on and off, drastically reduces the internal pressure risks.
But systemically, we need enforcement. You look at places like Chandni Chowk where these fires happen. They have ancient, degraded, tangled electrical wiring that was installed decades ago. It was never designed to handle the load of a dozen modern AC units running 247.
Which is why the municipal corporations and agencies like DSI-IDC must mandate and stringently enforce electrical safety audits for commercial buildings. This also ties directly into our international climate commitments.
Right.
The India Cooling Action Plan, launched in 2019, and our ratification of the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol require us to aggressively phase down these dangerous, high global warming potential HFC refrigerants by 85% by 2047. We need safer, more efficient cooling technology, and we need urban building codes that can support the electrical loads safely.
Just as citizens need safety features like voltage stabilizers and shaded coils to prevent physical infrastructure from overloading and exploding, the RBI recognizes that we desperately need an emergency brake for our digital infrastructure. We are transitioning from physical fires to digital ones.
This is a major, highly anticipated development from the RBI annual report, covering GS Paper 2 and 3. The RBI has formally proposed exploring the implementation of a kill switch for all digital payments.
This would be a single button, one click on your banking app or one phone call that instantly freezes your UPI, your debit cards, your credit cards, NEFT, RTGS, absolutely every digital channel connected to your account.
The catalyst for this drastic proposal is the sheer devastating scale of the cybercrime epidemic in India. National Crime Records Bureau data and banking reports suggest Indians lost roughly Rs 1.3 lakh crore, that is about $15 billion to digital fraud in the 2024-25 period alone.
That's a staggering amount of money.
And the most dangerous, rapidly growing threat is something called authorized push payment, or APP fraud.
Let's explain APP fraud because it completely bypasses all the sophisticated security algorithms the banks have spent billions building.
Standard fraud detection looks for anomalies. It looks for a hacker trying to brute force a password from a foreign IP address, or a card being swiped in 2 different countries on the same day. The bank's software flags it and blocks it. But in APP fraud, the fraudster doesn't hack the computer system, they hack the human.
Right.
They use sophisticated social engineering, they use phishing links, elaborate fake investment scams promising 100% returns, or the terrifying digital arrest scams.
Oh, the digital arrest scams are brutal. Fraudsters pose as CBI or customs officials on a video call. They tell the victim a package intercepted in their name contains illegal drugs or their Aadhaar card was used in money laundering. They terrify the victim, isolate them, and demand they transfer all their funds to a secure RBI account for verification.
They psychologically manipulate the victim into logging into their own banking app from their own known device, typing in their own UPI/PIN, and authorizing the transfer themselves. Because the legitimate customer is pushing the button from their usual location, the bank's security system sees it as a perfectly valid, authorized transaction. It doesn't trigger any alarms.
And because of the efficiency of our UPI system, once that money moves, it instantly hits the scammer's account, gets broken up into a dozen mule accounts, and is withdrawn as crypto or cash in seconds.
Gone.
The RBI realized that currently, there is no single way for a victim to freeze all their digital channels instantly if they realize mid-scam that they've been tricked. You can open your app and turn off your debit card, but the scammer is still draining your UPI. You try to call customer care, but you are on hold for 15 minutes while your life savings disappear.
Singapore provides the critical international precedent here. The Monetary Authority of Singapore, MAS, recognized this exact vulnerability and mandated a money lock and kill switch for all major banks. Customers can instantly lock their funds, which then require a physical branch visit with an ID card to unlock. After implementation, Singapore saw a 24% decline in online banking scam losses in 2024.
But implementing a kill switch in Singapore is a very different beast than implementing it in India. Singapore is a small city-state with maybe 3 to 4 billion digital transactions a year. India's UPI processes 185 billion transactions a year across an incredibly fragmented ecosystem of over 300 different banks, cooperative societies, and payment apps.
That is the massive technological and coordination complexity the RBI has to solve. Building an API that instantly communicates a freeze order from Google Pay to the State Bank of India to a rural cooperative bank in milliseconds is a monumental task.
Yeah, that's not easy.
And it's not just the kill switch they're proposing. To combat APP fraud, the RBI is also proposing a mandatory 1-hour delay on first-time high-value transfers over Rs 10,000 between new users and auto-disabling digital features on newly opened bank accounts by default to stop the creation of mule accounts.
I have to push back on this from a consumer perspective, though. If I have a medical emergency, or if I just need to quickly send 10,000 rupees to my mechanic for a repair and I have to wait an hour, or if I accidentally hit the kill switch in my app and have to take half a day off work to physically visit a branch with biometric proof to turn my money back on, haven't we just killed the instant part of instant payments? Aren't we punishing the 99% of people who use this system safely every day for the 1% who get scammed?
It is the ultimate tightrope walk in financial regulation. Convenience versus security. The RBI explicitly acknowledged this tension in their report, stating that India's digital payment ecosystem is the envy of the world, and they do not want to introduce friction that destroys that velocity. The kill switch is designed as a self-activated last resort tool. It's a glass box you break in an emergency. It's not routine friction.
I guess fair.
And regarding the 1-hour delay on high-value new beneficiaries, yes, it might be annoying for paying a mechanic. But if that 60-minute cooling-off period breaks the psychological spell of an APP fraudster demanding immediate payment, allowing the victim time to call a family member and realize it's a scam, it saves the family from financial ruin. The friction is a feature, not a bug.
It's about protecting the integrity of the infrastructure. And speaking of digital infrastructure, the RBI wants to build tools to pause it for security. But telecom operators are aggressively looking for ways to speed it up for profit. Which brings us to our 10th and final topic today, and it is highly controversial. GS Paper 2 and 3 telecom regulation and the revival of the net neutrality debate.
In May 2026, Bharti Airtel launched a new service tier called Priority Postpaid. It marks the first major commercial deployment of 5G network slicing for consumer mobile services in India.
Here's how it works for the consumer. If you pay between Rs 449 and Rs 1,749 a month for these premium plans, and you have a compatible 5G standalone phone, Airtel will put you in a dedicated premium virtual network slice. When the cell tower gets heavily congested, say you are at a stadium during a cricket match or in a packed train station, your data gets guaranteed bandwidth while everyone else struggles to load a web page.
To understand why this is controversial, we have to look at the physics of the technology. Traditional 4G networks, or even early 5G non-standalone networks, act essentially like a single, massive, open pipe. All data, whether it's a Netflix video stream, a WhatsApp text message, or an IoT sensor transmitting temperature data, flows through the same pipe on a best effort basis.
Right.
If the pipe gets full, everyone slows down equally. But a true 5G standalone architecture separates the control plane from the user plane. It allows the core software to carve the physical radio network into multiple, independent, customized slices. Each slice can be configured with specific guarantees for speed, latency, or reliability.
The industrial applications for this are obvious and necessary. Autonomous vehicles get a dedicated low-latency slice so they can communicate instantly and not crash. Smart electricity meters get a low-bandwidth, high-reliability slice.
Yeah.
But Airtel isn't just selling this to factories. They are now selling a premium slice directly to wealthy consumers. And this immediately sparked a massive debate about net neutrality. India has some of the strictest, most progressive net neutrality rules in the world, enacted by the telecom regulator, TRAI, back in 2018.
The core tenet is that telecoms cannot discriminate between content, apps, or services. No paid prioritization, no fast lanes for YouTube while blocking a competitor.
Airtel's defense against the net neutrality violation claims rests on a very specific interpretation of the 2018 rules. They argue that priority postpaid is entirely content neutral. They aren't saying, pay us an extra 500 rupees and Netflix will stream faster than Amazon Prime.
Right.
They are saying, pay us extra and all of your data, regardless of what app or website you are using, gets priority during congestion. They argue that net neutrality was designed to protect the apps and content providers from discrimination by the telcos, not to mandate absolute equality of service for every single user, regardless of what they pay.
I understand the legal parsing, but logically, if I pay for priority, someone else inherently gets deprioritized when the network is congested, right? It's like adding a VIP toll lane to a highway. The highway is the exact same physical size. So if you cordon off a lane exclusively for VIPs, the regular lanes must become more crowded and move slower. How can Airtel mathematically claim this doesn't degrade the experience for the guy on the RS200 prepaid plan?
This highlights an important technical nuance of 5G slicing versus 4G throttling. 5G slicing isn't exactly like physically cordoning off an existing lane. It's more like using dynamic software to instantly build a new, temporary virtual lane on top of the highway using spare radio capacity.
Oh, interesting.
Airtel claims that their postpaid traffic currently constitutes only about 4 to 6% of their total network load, and they currently operate with roughly 60% spare capacity overall. So theoretically, prioritizing that 5% doesn't eat into the baseline capacity required to keep the prepaid users connected at standard speeds. They aren't slowing the prepaid user down, they're just giving the postpaid user the spare overhead.
And surprisingly, the Internet Freedom Foundation, the IFF, who were the fiercest, most vocal defenders of net neutrality back during the massive Facebook Free Basics debate of 2015, actually conceded the point, somewhat reluctantly. They issued a statement agreeing that under the strict legal definitions of the 2018 TRAI rules, user class slicing does not currently constitute a violation because it doesn't discriminate based on specific content or applications.
We also have to acknowledge the massive economic imperative driving this. Indian telcos have poured an estimated 3 to 5 lakh crore rupees into buying 5G spectrum at auction and building out the tower infrastructure. They're desperate to monetize that massive sunk cost.
Yes, but Indian consumers who are used to the cheapest data in the world flatly refuse to pay a higher base tariff simply for the 5G icon on their phone. Network slicing is globally viewed as the primary, perhaps only, pathway for telecoms to actually generate a return on their 5G investments by charging for guaranteed quality of service.
We are currently waiting on TRAI and the Department of Telecommunications to issue a formal consultation paper on the regulation of 5G slicing. But based on the industry murmurs, it seems highly likely they will permit QoS slicing for user classes, as long as the telcos can mathematically prove it doesn't degrade base services below a certain threshold, and as long as they maintain a strict ban on content-specific throttling.
It represents a pragmatic, necessary evolution of the regulatory rules to accommodate the reality of new technology in telecom economics.
Wow, okay, we have covered immense ground today. For the skies and the IMD's deeply concerning 90% monsoon forecast, tracking the El Nino effect, down to the price of Kharif crops.
We moved into the demographic health of our mothers and children with the complex victories and failures of NFHS 6.
Over to the severe macroeconomic anxieties of record FPI outflows detailed in the RBI report.
We examined the physical necessity of cool roofs and green cover in our burning 48-degree cities, the strategic balancing act and structural limits of the Quad in the Indo-Pacific, and the absolute financial dominance of Anthropic's $65 billion AI funding round, contrasted against India's domestic efforts.
We broke down the vital distinction between a 4.8% inflation rate and the reality of collapsing affordability when wages stagnate. We explored the unforgiving thermodynamics of why ACs are exploding in Delhi's heat. We analyzed the RBI's proposed kill switch to stem the $15 billion digital fraud epidemic. And finally, the nuanced net neutrality debate surrounding Airtel's 5G network slicing.
For a civil services aspirant, the overarching takeaway from this deep dive should be clear. You cannot study these events in isolated silos. The climate impacts agriculture, which directly impacts inflation and rural affordability, which dictates central bank monetary policy, which influences foreign investment flows and currency stability.
Is all one giant, breathing, interconnected system.
I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over as you prepare for your exams and your future careers. Throughout this deep dive, we talked about the IMD, the RBI, TRAI, and municipal building code authorities. All of these regulatory institutions and the laws governing them were fundamentally built for a slower analog world.
Right.
As climate change accelerates weather extremes, as AI models achieve trillion-dollar valuations and autonomous capabilities overnight, and as digital finance moves billions of rupees in milliseconds, the real question for you, the future administrators of this country, is this. Can our governance frameworks and legal structures evolve as fast as the exponential crises they are meant to solve?
That is the ultimate test of statecraft. It brings us right back to where we started today. You might want the comforting, clean precision of an X-ray, pointing out exactly where the break is so you can fix it. But in governance, the machine is always moving, the landscape is always murky, and the X-ray is broken. Your job isn't to find a simple binary answer. It's to navigate the chaos, understand the interconnected mechanisms, and build resilient systems that can withstand the pressure. Thank you so much for joining us on this daily deep dive. Keep questioning the headlines, keep looking for how the dots connect, and we will see you next time.